Hello, this is Mr. Stansbury. I'm going to take you through the 6B notes on linear equations. At the end of this, you should be able to solve linear and some quadratic equations. Okay. On this, I'm just going to show you a bunch of examples because this should look familiar from advanced algebra and even algebra. Okay. So, first one we're going to take a look at, example 4 from page 169. Solve both of these for x. So again, back from algebra, we just want to isolate the variable, right? So we want to get rid of everything else. So we got to get rid of this -1. So to get rid of a -1, we add 1 to both sides, right? And we get 4x equals 8 divided by 4. And look at that, x equals 2. Alright, and if you ever wanted to double check to make sure that it works, you could always plug it back in to make sure that it works. And if you look at this one here, you plug the 4 back in and we get 4 times 2 is 8, 8 minus 1 is 7. So then you actually know that it works as well. Okay, this one here, same idea, we want to get rid of the 5. So positive 5 minus 5 gives us 0, and we have negative 3x. 6 minus 5 equals 1. And then our last step, we got to get rid of the -3 from the x, so we divide by -3, both sides. That cancels out, and we get x, well, not cancels, but reduces out, and we get x equals -1/3. Alright? Okay, next set of examples. And again, as you're seeing these, if you're looking at this and say, hey, I can do this on my own, then feel free to pause it and pause the video, go through, try them out, and then start it back up to make sure that we're all getting the same thing. Okay. So x over 5 minus 3, so now we've got some fractions in here. No big deal, so add 3 to both sides. And that cancels out, and we get x over 5 equals -1 plus 3 is 2. Now there's 2 different ways to do this from this point here. You could either put it, I'll show you this way first. I can put this over 1 and we can do cross products. So we've got this, we've got x times 1 should equal 5 times 2, so 1 times x should equal 5 times 2. Oops, that's not a 2, that's a 2. So x equals 10, that's one way. Or we had x over 5 equaled 2. You can look at this and say, oh, look, we're taking x and dividing by 5, so to undo dividing by 5, I would multiply both sides by 5 to get rid of those, and we'd get x equals 10 that way. So either way, you get the same thing. Okay. This one here, you could also do, there's 2 different ways to do this. One way is to distribute the 1/5 through and then move it. That's fairly painful. I think a much easier way to do this is to get rid of the 1/5. So, to get rid of this 1/5, I'm going to say, okay, how many 1/5 do we need to make a whole? That would be 5. So if I multiply this by 5, those cancel out, right? And you're just left with x minus 3 over here. And then, but you still have to distribute this 5 to this -1, so you get x minus 3 equals -5. Add 3 to both sides, and you get x equals 2. Okay? Now again, if you're saying, hey, wait a minute, I'm not sure if that's quite right, then we double check it, and oh look, that should be -2. -5 and 3 is -2. If you plug -2 in there, -2 and -3 is -5. -5, 1/5 of -5 is in fact -1, so that works. Okay. So again, I missed my negative in there, but thankfully went to plug it back in and kind of realized it didn't work. So it's a good way to double check to make sure you didn't make some silly math error. Okay. Let's take a look at example 6 from page 170. It says solve for x. And we have this here. Now, this one it's probably just going to be a little bit easier on this one to just distribute this through, because we don't have to deal with any fractions and it won't be that terribly painful. So honestly, I think that's probably the easiest way. So I'm just going to distribute this 3 through to both of those, and the negative 2, not just the 2, but the negative 2 to both of these as well. So 3 times 2x gives us 6x. 3 times negative 5 is negative 15. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. And negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2. And that should all equal 3. I'm going to collect my like terms. So I know that 6x and negative 2x go together to make 4x. And then I'm going to take my negative 15 and my 2 to make negative 13, and this all equals 3. Add 13 to both sides, and we get 4x equals 16 divided by 4, and x equals 4. Right? Alright. Let's take a look at the next example. That's example 7 from page 171. We're going to solve both of these for x. Now if you'll notice here, look, now we have x's on both sides of the equation. So that's the new part on this example. So I'm going to want to move my x's to one side and all my constants to the other side. It doesn't matter which side you move to, but for my sake, to keep my life a little bit easier, I'm going to move this 2x. I'm going to get rid of the 2x from this right side because I know that that will end up keeping the positive over here. So I'm going to subtract 2x from both sides. And that makes this go away. And we have x minus 4 equals 6. Now we're just back to where we started with the other ones. Add 4 to both sides. And we get x equals 10. Okay? So on this one here, again, I'm going to distribute this negative 3 through to both of those and see what we get. 4 minus 6. Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. Negative 3 times x is minus 3x equals x. Again, to get rid of this negative 3x, I'm going to have to add the 3x. So I'm going to add 3x to both sides. And I get 4 minus 6, which is negative 2, equals 4x, right? And my last step is going to be to divide by 4, and I get that x equals negative a half. Okay? Alright, one last example, and then we are good to go. Okay, example 8, page 172. Solve this thing here for x. Now this one looks a little bit more tricky. This is where we're getting into our quadratic equation because we've got x squared. Okay, so really what we need to do on this is just multiply this out, and you got to FOIL that. You can't just take x squared and then negative 3 squared. That will not work. So we've got to actually FOIL the x minus 3 squared out. Okay, so again, most people are used to seeing this, x minus 3, and you do x minus 3, and you FOIL. Remember that? Everyone's favorite math F word, right? X times x is x squared. X times negative 3 is negative 3x. Negative 3 times x is another negative 3x. And negative 3 times negative 3 is 9. So this FOILed out gives us x squared. Negative 3x and negative 3x is negative 6x plus 9. Okay? If you really, really, really hate FOIL and you want to try it a different way, there's a different way that I've shown people in the past, and it does the exact same thing, just a different way, and I call it, for lack of a better word, I just call it the stack, because I just stack them one on top of the other, and now it's just multiplication, just like a regular old 2-digit by 2-digit number. So I do negative 3 times negative 3 is 9. Negative 3 times x is negative 3x. Remember, you always put the 0 in there to hold the place. X times negative 3 is negative 3x. And then x times x is x squared. So again, as long as these terms here, like this isn't like an x squared and a 3 or something like that, it will line all of these up really nicely so that when you go to add them up, it makes it pretty easy. So we've got 9 here. Negative 3x and negative 3x is negative 6x. And there's our x squared. Right? X squared minus 6x plus 9. Same thing as over here. So whichever way you want to do it, go for it. And then this one over here, we've got to FOIL this one out too. And again, I'm kind of partial to stacking them, so I'm going to do that. So 4 plus x over 2 plus x. X times x is x squared. X times 4 is 4x. Alright, I'm going to put my 0 in there. 2 times x is 2x, and then 2 times 4 is 8. So it's 8 plus 6x plus x squared. I'm going to just rewrite it in what descending order of powers. So I'm going to write the x squared first. It doesn't really truly matter in this. It just looks a little bit nicer. So I'm going to write x squared plus 6x plus 8. And now we've got to solve it. Now the good news is if you, again, we got to move all the x's to one side or the other, like the x squareds here. So let's say I want to move them to the right. I subtract x squared from both sides. And look, they're magically gone from both of these. So we just end up with negative 6x plus 9 equals 6x plus 8. So we've lost our x squared, so now we're back to what we were doing before, just like the last example. So I'm going to move I'm going to add 6x to both sides. So that makes this go away, and we just have 9. We get 12x plus 8. Subtract 8 from both sides, and we get 1 equals 12x. Right? So we divide both sides by 12.
Custodian, please report to the front office, please. Custodian to the front office.
Divide both sides by 12, and we get x equals 1/12. Alright, a little bit longer, but that's doable. You've done that before, probably in advanced algebra, and maybe a little bit in algebra too. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thanks.